Hey YouTube, it's Tech Savvy Solution here, and I'm here with a comparison review comparing the Tmobile G2X and the Tmobile G2 head to head. So you may think there's not much of a difference just because they're both Tmobile G2 and this one has an extra X, but it does make a difference. There's definitely different features that each phone has and the other one doesn't have, or different specs and otherwise. So let's get started. First I want to apologize, haven't been on for a while. I was really busy these past 2.5 months-ish. So now I'm back with a video review. Alright, so let's get into the review again. So let's look at the general specs and dimensions of each phone. So I have the G2X right here in my hands. So going across this way, we have 124.5 millimeters, 63.5 millimeters this way, and a mere 10.2 millimeters deep. Oh, by the way, this weighs 141.8 grams, so it's a pretty good sized phone. It's not too heavy. Whereas this phone over here weighs 184.3 grams. That's a heavy phone. Plus, it's smaller, so it's more like dense, and it seems heavier than it actually really is. In terms of dimensions, we have 119.4 millimeters this way, 61 millimeters this way, and a mere 15.2 millimeters deep. And I say mere because it's, voila, a QWERTY keyboard phone, and that's pretty thin for keyboard phones. So we'll get into keyboard later. In terms of the display, both displays carry a 480 by 800 pixel resolution. However, this one is 4 inches across and this is 3.7 inches across. So in terms of like pixel density, this is less dense and this is more dense. Alright, so in terms of memory, we have 8 gigs of internal storage here, but it's always expandable up to 32 gigs. And then for the G2, we have 4 gigs of internal storage, and that is also expandable up to 32 gigs with an external SD card. Let me just make a note in terms of the location of the external SD card. It was kind of bothering me a little bit for the G2. Well, right now I have the G2X in my hands. If we wanted to remove the memory card is over here. So it's convenient for the G2X if you wanted to just remove it and put it on the computer or something if you're for some odd reason you want to take out the memory card. However, for the G2, check out the battery door. This is really useful. You have to take out the battery in order to get to the micro SD card. And I don't know, that's just a little gripe. You have to restart your phone every time you want to take out your micro SD card. It's not like you can hot swap it or anything. But yeah, just want to make note of that. And if you didn't see earlier, the battery doors of both these phones are quite different. So for the G2X you have to pry it off, and for the G2 you have a convenient switch that takes it off like that. And I appreciate the simplicity of the design. In terms of RAM, both phones have a 512 megabyte storage for RAM. Not really storage, but if you were to run multiple applications at once, then both these phones are fairly capable of doing it just because you have a good amount of memory too. In terms of the camera, which we will demo in a moment, the G2X has an 8 megapixel camera, and it has autofocus, LED flash, etc., etc. But with the video, it can record full HD 1080p, and as well as the 720p HD video. For the G2X, it also has a front-facing camera, whereas the G2 does not. And the G2's back-facing camera is a 5 megapixel camera, also with flash and autofocus and all that good stuff. However, it cannot record in full 1080p video. It can only record in 720p video. So let's take a look at the cameras. I'm gonna go here. Alright, so if we take a look at the features, I'm not gonna really focus on anything right now. First of all, let me make note that since I'm running a custom ROM for the G2, the camera looks a bit different than the stock Android camera over here. But basically, you have about the same features. For the LG, you have an option of not back and back camera, but since I'm running a custom ROM, there's a slight glitch. It's supposed to say back and front camera, whereas on the G2, you only have an option for the back camera. So for the settings, you have, for the G2X, all your normal stuff. You have presets for all the scene modes, and then you also have the picture size, picture quality, and color effect, ISO, flicker reduction, etc. You also have location settings if you wanted to geotag your photos. And then you have those settings, flash modes, and zoom. So for the zoom on the G2X, you have up to 7.2 times digital zoom. Whereas for the G2, you have about the same settings as well. You also have the contrast. I don't think this one has the contrast settings, which is really useful in dark lighting. You can adjust the contrast over here. You also have location settings, and then these settings as well, and then the flash modes, of course. But then for the zoom, you only have, if you can see here, you only have about 2 times the digital zoom, and you compare it to the G2X's 8 times digital zoom. It's a big difference. So for the G2X's front-facing camera, it is 1.3 megapixels. Just want to make note of that. So if we go back home, and if you notice here on the capacitive buttons, for the G2X, the buttons are as follows: the menu, home, back, and search. For the G2, it's home, menu, back, and search. So when I'm switching between phones, it's kind of like, oh, I'm getting messed up because the menu and the home buttons are switched up. But yeah, what are you going to do about it, right? So in terms of the OS, we have the G2 and the G2X both running on Android 2.3. The G2X did not come with 2.3 out of the box, but I installed a custom ROM, and I'm pretty sure they have the Gingerbread firmware out already, so I'm running that right now. In terms of the CPU, this is 800 megahertz, whereas this is 1 gigahertz. And not just 1 gigahertz, but it's dual core 1 gigahertz versus 800. However, I want to make note that you can overclock both phones. So for the G2, it's like, since it came out, it's been like all the devs are overclocking it, so it's fairly common and it's fairly safe as long as you don't go up to like 1.9 or anything. But I overclocked it to 1 gigahertz just to like try and match the dual core 1 gigahertz here. But anyways, we'll run some speed tests later on and test out the CPU of each phone. In terms of battery life, we have on the G2 a 430 battery life, or standby time in terms of battery life. And then for talk time on the G2, we have 9 hours and 50 minutes. For the G2X, we have a standby time of 400 hours and a talk time of 7 hours and 40 minutes. And then let's take a look at the batteries. Oh, that's my camera. Alright, so let's take out the battery cover over here. You notice we have a 500 milliamp battery on the G2X. And yeah, that's my camera again. I have a really cheaply made camera stand. It's very rudimentary, so alright, and then here's for the G2. And again, I want to note the simplicity of the battery door. Okay. Yeah, just do that and pry it off. And here's the HTC battery, and I don't want to take out the battery to show you, but there we go. Okay. I also want to make note the difference between these two phones, another difference I'd like to say, is that for the G2X, we have a place for an HDMI cable, which is over here. And what the HDMI cable allows you to do is stream content from your phone to your TV or any other device that you can connect an HDMI cable to. So what I mean by streaming is that, like, whatever goes on in your phone, whether you're browsing the web or just flipping through your launcher pages like that, it'll display exactly what's going on the screen. So if you want to show pictures or videos, movies, etc. to your family and friends, instead of having to crowd around this little screen over here, you can broadcast everything to a larger TV screen or computer screen. That's fairly useful. Also, I want to note the speaker locations of each phone. For the G2X, we have the speakers located down the bottom here. And then for the G2, the speaker is over here. And it's quite tiny, so let me play a sample of music for each phone. And hold on a minute. Just open up the music app on each phone and let me show you the difference in quality. So let's just say, let's listen to some Brahms. Alright. So you notice the speakers are pretty loud. Alright, and let's how about some pop music? And they're really loud speakers. It's really convenient since, like, the speakers are down here, so when you set down your phone, they just broadcast out like that. Whereas for the G2, if you set down your phone, the speakers are they're covered. So it's slightly inconvenient. And let's take a look at some songs for the G2. Right. So I'm gonna do the same pieces. So we have Brahms. And I'm gonna put it on max volume. And then let's go back to the Click 5 and compare that kind of music. I mean, I guess this is also a fairly loud speaker. However, the sound coming out of each speaker, for the G2, it's a little on the tinny side. And because it's coming from this tiny speaker up here, whereas on the G2, the G2X, I mean, it's more rich and you can hear more ranges, like on the lower range and the higher range, and just get more beef out of the sound, I guess, versus a tinny sound that comes from the G2. Alright, but sound aside, let's take a look at some other differences between these phones. So I mentioned before, we have the screen, right? The screen resolution. So for a G2, we have an IPS display, and what's that supposed to do for your screen, or the screen quality, is you're supposed to get better viewing angles. So right now you can see the viewing angle on this side, and the viewing angle on this side, right? And then let's compare it to the G2. And this is the Super LCD. Let's take a look at viewing angle for this. And then viewing angle for this. In my opinion, I mean, they're both good screens. This is slightly better in terms of not having that much reflection. But I really don't mind either one. Either one is fine. I still think, in comparison to the iPhone screens, the iPhone screen is better. But whatever, right? It's a screen, so it's the content that matters, pretty much. So what I'm going to do now is take a stopping point, and let's check out part 2 of this comparison review. And I hope you will stay tuned and just realize this is a really in-depth review. And yeah, catch you later in part 2.